Good evening, everyone. How are we doing on this balmy Thursday evening? Well, they came to the right place. My name is John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside, and tonight we're fortunate to have Holly Merker with us during the biggest week in birding. This evening's talk, Ornithotherapy, the power of bird watching. We'll explore how research shows that connecting with nature actively reduces stress, depression, and anxiety while helping build a stronger heart and immune system. Wild birds offer the perfect gateway into deeper experiences with nature, magnifying these benefits. Concerning our presenter, Holly is a professional birding guide, author, and lecturer with a background in art therapy, but today uses birds and nature towards the same goals to deliver nature-based wellness programs for peoples of all ages. Holly shares her love of birds instructing for the American Birding Association, the National Audubon Society, Hillstar Nature, and many other organizations. She holds a certificate in wellness counseling and is a certified nature and forest therapy guide, weaving birds into both fields. Quick reminder, we have additional programs. Tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m., Holly will lead a bird walk beginning at the train station pavilion. Then in the evening, Arthur Pearson of the Roger Tory Peterson Institute will give a talk on the legacy and inspiration of Roger Tory Peterson. I do ask at the end if you would just take a quick moment of your time to complete an evaluation form or let me know what how the program is, how I should weave these programs into the future seasons. It's always appreciated and very helpful. Lastly, I would ask if you would please mute your cell phone ringers. And without further ado, please welcome Holly Merker.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, John, and thank you, everybody here at Lakeside Chautauqua. I am honored to be here this evening, coming in from Pennsylvania, not too far, but a neighboring state. So, well, we're all here this evening to talk about this subject of what makes birds so amazingly, oops, I guess I've done it the wrong way here, amazingly special for us. And I think we can all appreciate that there's a lot of joy in observing birds, either by ear or by eyes, but is there something more for us in it, besides just that enjoyment? Well, I certainly believe so, because I truly believed that this practice of ornithotherapy and observing birds helped to save my life. And I know that's a bold statement, but I'll explain why I feel I can say that in a few minutes. But the fact is that we all need nature for our own overall well-being. And even Hippocrates said thousands of years ago that nature itself is the best physician. So, how many of you have had your healthcare providers write you a prescription for being in nature or going birding? Raise your hands if this has happened for you. No, I hear some chuckles back there. Yeah, well, not yet. And I can say that optimistically, not yet, because this is on the horizon. The fact is enjoying the quality of our experiences with birds holds a lot of power. And really, it starts right outside of our own windows and doors. And perhaps you can relate to this, that how many of you feed birds? Have bird feeders out, or perhaps you have native plants that draw birds in, or something like water. They offer us so much more than just that visit, but that visit itself is quite powerful. So in the early years of this pandemic that we've all been going through, it was really difficult to socialize, to be with friends or even our families, but what we could do was draw the birds in closer by offering food, by bringing in water, and in fact, thousands and thousands of people discovered the joy of bird watching and started to hang feeders, started to notice birds. Perhaps you too had a friend that said to you, are the birds singing louder this year? All of a sudden, the world came alive to a lot of people, and part of that was just slowing down and taking time to notice. But sometimes these visitors can really help us and take that edge off of loneliness or what we might be feeling, of feeling isolated. And I have this example up here. This is a photo that a friend of mine sent to me. And maybe some of you have heard of this new style of bird feeder that's called a bird buddy. Anybody have a bird buddy out there? This type of bird feeder is like the next frontier of bird feeding, because what it is it has a little camera on it. And this little camera records video. And it also uses artificial intelligence to analyze that whatever bird's visiting your feeder. And then it sends a little text message when you have it all set up to your smart device, your tablet or your phone or whatever. I'm not affiliated with this company. I'm bringing this up not because I'm trying to market it, but just to say this. This is an example. So I have this friend who was going through a really rough time in her life. Her kids had just flown the nest, they had fledged, and unfortunately the timing of this kind of coincided with her husband being diagnosed with an early onset of dementia. And so her life became very complicated and very difficult very quickly. And there came a time when she had to find a memory care center for him to reside in, and she was feeling lonely. On top of that, she's a college counselor, so she was doing a lot of counseling of other people who were going through difficult things, and she was finding herself in a very low place. But she got one of these bird buddy cameras. I had no idea that she had purchased this, and all of a sudden she sends me this text message this one day with this picture of this eastern bluebird, and she said, "Oh my gosh, Holly, my whole day has changed. I was in a really dark, low place, and all of a sudden I got a notification on my phone that says, 'You have a visitor.'" And then she popped it open. It played this video of this eastern bluebird, and it just brought her so much joy and so much happiness. And this is the power of birds, that they can change our mindset, and just by paying us a visit, it can help make us feel less lonely, less isolated, and bring joy into our day or into our life. And probably a lot of you can relate to this, where all of a sudden your attention is captured by a bird at the feeder. And in fact, there's studies that show, whoops, I keep doing the wrong thing here. There's studies that show that people who regularly feed birds feel more connected to nature, and they feel good about doing that. And this is powerful when we think about how we can connect to nature and the birds right outside our own doors. And when we start feeling more connected, it not only does something for our well-being, but it also helps the bird as well. Now, birds, they do amazing things for people. In addition to being so good for us, as I'm going to talk about, they also bring people together. I mean, look around this room. You all are here because you like birds, right? And that brings people together. So we can be from all different walks of life, but we can find each other. We can find birds to be our common ground, our common language, and bring us together. And there's something really amazing in that. So birds are truly community builders. And I'm talking all about birds. There's a lot of science out there talking about the benefits of being in nature and connecting to the natural world. But why am I talking about birds? Well, birds are that gateway into deeper experiences with nature. So we can find ourselves kind of following the birds, watching the birds, understanding them. And what's really neat about this is that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Survey did a study in 2016, and they looked at how many people reported enjoying birds on some level, and whether that be looking out your window or feeding birds, or perhaps you go to the local park to look for birds, or perhaps it's you go on far-flung vacations to look for birds. And at that time in 2016, nearly 47 million Americans reported enjoying birds on some level. But what's really cool is that same study was done in 2022, okay, just 2 years ago, and the results just came out within the last 6 months, or about 9 months or so, and it suggests that 96 million Americans now report loving birds on some level. Again, however they're seeking them out, but they are noticing birds. That is a 50 million, nearly a 50 million jump in how many people appreciate and notice birds, and that is a good thing. So we can see that birds are a great entry and gateway into the love of nature, and of course, because birds are everywhere. They're in every human habitat. Wherever people live, birds live too. So they're equitable in that way, whereas all forms of nature are not universal. We can't, if we live in a dense urban ecosystem, we can't find birds in a forest easily, right? We might not have access to the forest, but what we do have is the birds that are living in the city. And birds are wherever you are and wherever you go. And by seeking birds and taking in each moment, we are rewarded with benefits to our mind, body, and soul. And this is ornitherapy. So ornitherapy is something called a nature-based health innovation. And so intervention, I should say. It's an innovation as well, but it's also an intervention. So what's going on here is a nature-based health innovation can be defined as activities or strategies. For example, implementing a healing garden in a hospital or near a patient care center. That would be an example of a nature-based health intervention. Bringing nature into an office, like adding in lots of plants, or maybe it's a water feature inside the building. That's something called biophilic design, which more architects are incorporating because of those wellness benefits. But also activities that are helpful to people. For example, like connecting to birds, like doing things like forest bathing. I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a few minutes. But the idea here is that when we incorporate nature into our lifestyle more, it benefits us. But it also benefits the natural world because we're paying more attention. And this idea, this idea of bringing nature into our wellness and pairing birding with mindfulness practice, or with just thinking about birding as a form of wellness, is a good thing. But really, what's going on here? Why is it so good? And I'll start with our mental wellness. For one thing, birds can give us the distraction or commercial break, if you will, of what's going on in our busy lives. And this temporarily redirects our emotions and also our thinking. And studies show that when we give ourselves the time, give ourselves permission to take a break, even a short break in our day, and perhaps just step outside, or we might be just looking out a window, that this is good for us. And so psychologists, Drs. Kaplan and Kaplan, call this the attention restoration theory. And what they suggest is that when we allow ourselves these breaks, and we actually start immersing ourselves in nature by perceiving sounds, by watching, by maybe feeling like the wind on your skin, these types of things, we activate a different part of our brain than that busy tasking self that is always trying to attend to what's on my to-do list next, what email do I have to answer, what do I need to do at the store, these types of things. When we give ourselves that break, it's positive, so that when we're focusing on something that's super technical or analytical, we can come back to that practice with a restored mind. So it's restoring our attention. I mean, think about it this way. It's sort of like our lives, we're so busy and our brains are constantly going with so much information input these days. It's like we're constantly on a treadmill. But if we take a little break, relax those muscles, give them a little massage, if you will, and then when we go back to that, we'll be stronger. Does that make sense? This is what the power of nature holds for people. But also it offers us a space where we can feel that we're without any judgment. For example, you can walk outdoors and be with the birds, be in nature, and be yourself. Nobody's going to judge you. The birds aren't going to judge you for how you're feeling, perhaps how you're looking. Maybe you're having a bad hair day. In my case, it was a no-hair day, and the birds aren't going to judge you for how you look, how you feel, what's going on in your life. You can be yourself. It's a judgment-free zone. And nature and birds are available for all people to enjoy and experience. This young man here is one of my two sons. This is Henry. And Henry was going through a really difficult time a couple of years ago. He was in college. He was 4 years into a 5-year chemical engineering degree, and he realized that he wasn't in the right place. He realized that this wasn't what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. And he had this kind of, he went into a deep depression, because what do you do when you're that far into something like that? He had put a lot of effort into it. He was a very good student, but his heart wasn't there. And he became very depressed as he was trying to sort out what to do next. And I, as his mom, got really worried about his well-being. And he was self-isolating. He's a musician. He wasn't playing in his band. He wasn't doing the things he normally would do. And one day, I had been doing a bird census. It's called the Philadelphia Midwinter Census at the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge, which is near the Philadelphia International Airport. If you ever have a chance to visit there, it's really a wonderful place. But anyway, I had noticed, myself and the other birders I was surveying with, we saw a couple of saw-whet owls. And saw-whet owls look like the little owl up here on the screen in the corner here, but they're teeny tiny. I have one on my license plate out there. Maybe you've seen this in the PA license plate. We have the saw-whet owl. Well, the older ones anyway. Anyhow, and I thought, well, gosh, maybe if I can take Henry down to see these owls, he'll sort of, snap out of it a little bit, or he'll come out of his shell, or something, knowing that who doesn't love an owl? So I asked him, and he was resistant to this idea. He was like, no, I don't want to go. And I said, please, Henry, I promise if you're not having a good time, I'll take you right back home. And so he reluctantly agreed. And he came with me, and we went to see that we saw the first owl, and it was so high up in a tree. It was sort of underwhelming, but I knew where another one was, and I knew that we'd have a better chance at seeing it. As we were walking along on the trail, all of a sudden I was talking to Henry, and I looked over, and in a tree is this saw-whet owl. And I had walked by this saw-whet owl in a holly tree, nonetheless, and there aren't a lot of holly trees down there, but in a holly tree, I don't know how many times earlier that day, as did every other birder that was at the refuge, and nobody had seen this one. And so I was like, oh my gosh, Henry, there's one right there. So this is the view I took with my phone through my spotting scope of the saw-whet owl in the tree. And she was just sitting there looking, if you've seen these owls before, they're sort of like sweet little cats that they just sit there and they kind of open their eyes and look, and then they go back to sleep. Really sweet. But as Henry was watching this bird, I saw for the first time in weeks a smile break out on his face. And after a period of time, his shoulders started to relax. All that tension he was holding kind of just started to melt away. Now that was amazing enough, but it got even better because there were two ladies walking down the trail towards us, and we invited them to come look through the spotting scope and see this wonderful little saw-whet owl. And one of them started to cry because she had never seen an owl before, and she was experiencing awe. And there was something extremely powerful in witnessing somebody else connecting and feeling and experiencing awe. And we know that these experiences of awe help us, they can also have a diminished sense of self in a positive way so that our problems aren't as big and is powerful and therapeutic as well. But witnessing somebody else by, for example, all these programs that Lakeside Chautauqua is offering for you, facilitating these experiences for you to share all together, that is powerful and important. And we can all benefit from these types of experiences. But really, birds are capturing people's attention and providing us this connection, allowing us to have these moments of awe all over the place. And perhaps you too have experienced this phenomena in your own lives of showing somebody else something magical, and they experience awe and the joy that that brings to you. And this concept of accessing nature for well-being is not something new. For thousands of years, people have been practicing this idea, this concept of nature providing us well-being. And this word, ornithotherapy, is not my word or that of my co-authors. And I could first find it referenced in print in 1979 in the British Journal of Medicine. A doctor in London named Dr. A.F. Cox. And Dr. Cox, he was getting a little frustrated with all the side effects of medications he was prescribing to his patients. And he was a birder. And he thought, well, gosh, you know, bird watching, it makes me feel so good. I love seeing birds coming into my feeder. You know, it redirects my mind, all these things. So he started prescribing bird watching to some of his patients. And what he reported in the British Medical Journal is that as a tranquilizer, bird watching may be as effective as any drug, but cheaper and safer than money. So in thinking about that this idea that bird watching can be a tranquilizer, that it can provide us calm, that can reset our mental channel or change our mental channel, if you will, and just put us in a happy space. And the fact is that we all need ornithotherapy. And if we allow birds and nature to slow us down, then we are kind of self-medicating with these doses of ornithotherapy. But let's talk a little bit more about what's going on here. What is the science that's activating this chemical response or this physical change for us? Well, we do know this because there's been a bunch of research on cortisol. So cortisol is that stress hormone that when we're feeling stressed out, when we're sick, when we're anxious, it kind of flips into overdrive. And prolonged periods of cortisol elevation in our systems is just not good for us. It erodes away at our immune system. It impacts our ability to sleep well. It also affects our metabolism. You know, it just isn't really great for us. But what we do know through measured study is that after 20 minutes in green spaces, just by being outdoors and absorbing all of the elements visually, and also I'll talk a little bit more about the chemicals that are circulating in the air, but that our cortisol levels start to lower after 20 minutes, and it's a measurable impact of lowering. And if you can keep, you know, exposing yourself to the outdoors, after 40 minutes, it starts a significant decline as well. So it's kind of at the 20-minute mark, you can really see a decrease, and then it keeps gradually decreasing. Well, I don't know. This is pretty easy, right? I mean, if this is beneficial to our bodies and can help our mind, improve our mindset, also improve all these things for healthy living, then it's sort of a no-brainer in a lot of ways, right? That nature is good for us. And this is the refuge that nature can offer us. And so there have been many different studies that have emerged, particularly in the recent last 10 or so years. And this one here comes out of the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, supported by the British Trust for Ornithology and the University of Queensland in Australia, which suggests that people living in areas with more birds are less likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and stress. And best of all, you don't have to know anything about birds to benefit. So you don't have to have an ID guide and be out there identifying everything or know everything you're listening to or seeing in order to reap the benefits of being in this rich, biodiverse area that have a lot of birds. And that's really significant when we think about that. And I really think that any realtors out there that are trying to sell a property, if it's got a lot of biodiversity and a lot of birds, they should put that on there. If you buy this house, you'll be happier and healthier, and here's the study to support it. Because truly, this is you know, pretty impactful when you start thinking about it. And whoop, that's a little stream there. This study came out this past August, and this is a really interesting study. It was a couple of researchers based out of the United States and also Canada. And this study suggests that areas with lower bird diversity had higher mental health admissions to hospitals. So thinking about that, that is really telling. Now, if you're looking at areas with these higher mental health admissions, and they also had fewer birds, what does that say? Now, the researchers have noted that while this is a significant outcome, and let me just back up a little bit, because I want to ask you, how many of you use the eBird database from Cornell? Like you put data into eBird or the Great Backyard Bird Count? Okay, great, because this is where you're paying forward. Because in order to do this research, they took eBird data to gather the bird diversity and the bird population numbers from the state of Michigan. And they took that and they overlaid it with hospital admissions for mental health, mood disorders. And that's where your contributions that you're giving to eBird make a difference, because you may think that the starling or the pigeon you saw somewhere is insignificant, but actually we start using eBird as a social science indicator and taking these information, these data, and putting them together, we can look at human well-being as much as we can bird well-being, right, as conservation. So it's conservation not just of the birds, but also of humans as well. And so what the researchers are suggesting is that while this outcome is significant and can also hopefully play a role in how we plan and develop our cities or urban landscapes and how we consider what we're doing, the impacts we're having by bringing in more native plants or perhaps bringing in more biodiversity in urban landscapes, because really where there's lacking bird diversity, oftentimes it has to do with being in an urban landscape, if you think about that correlation. But they want to see more research supporting what the outcome that they have had from this particular study. But again, this is good for the birds, because when we start thinking about that, we start to make some changes and incorporating some ideas of, again, bringing more biodiversity in, because the birds are going to be where the food is, right? And the food is insects. It's insects, it's other types of organisms that they can eat and also that they can feed their young. But one other thing that makes birds so impactful on our well-being is bird song. And so there's been a lot of research that's been really looking at how bird song affects our mood. Now, this kind of makes sense, because when we listen to bird song that we like, perhaps it has an influence. For example, when we listen to music that we like, dopamine, the chemical messenger that facilitates the feeling of pleasure, that is released when we listen to music we like. But doesn't it make sense that when we listen to the sound of birds, that has the same impact? Well, think about it as we listen to this wood thrush. So there have been multiple studies that are looking at this idea that birdsong can improve our mental well-being. And a study that emerged in 2022 from King's College in London suggests that seeing and hearing birds is associated with an improvement of mental well-being that can last up to 8 hours. And specifically, what the study said was that if you are exposed to bird song for up to 6 minutes, it can have lasting impact on lessening the grip of anxiety. You'll feel less anxious for up to 8 hours, and it can disrupt irrational thinking. Only 6 minutes is all it takes of listening to bird song. So just thinking about that this time of year, if we keep our windows open in the morning, we can hear the abundant dawn chorus in a lot of places, or just being outside. It's a time of year when birds are actively singing. And other studies also kind of put the same idea out there that bird song just helps us feel better. And this was another study that looked at the impact of bird song by introducing birdsong to one group that were walking on a trail and didn't have it with the other because they put phantom speakers, like phantom birdsong little speakers, out hidden along this walk, and they could see that both groups, with group A that had the birdsong, their survey showed that they had an improved or boosted sense of well-being, whereas group B did not. They did not have that same measurable improved well-being. And this could be directly correlated to birdsong. So why is that? Why is birdsong impacting our well-being? Well, think about it. As people who love birds, we probably know that when birds are singing, they feel safe, meaning there are no immediate dangers or threats. And like this Carolina wren that was singing his heart out in my yard, he's not going to be doing that if the Cooper's hawk's nearby, right? He's going to be making a totally different noise, or he's going to be quiet because there's a predator nearby. And because, we're animals as well, and our minds recognize this and relax with the birds, creating a relaxed but alert state of mind. So we're kind of putting ourselves in this kind of like, okay, the birds are singing, the world is okay around us. And this is something that we're kind of teasing out now, but recognizing the impact of birds is a good thing. And it's so good, this idea of nature being for well-being, it's being practiced in other parts of the world. So this concept of forest bathing, now that's a really strange word. Has anybody heard of forest bathing before? Yeah, so a couple people have heard of it. Well, forest bathing, okay, so it doesn't mean that we're going out into the forest in our bathing suits, and, we're not shedding our clothes or anything. The only thing we're shedding is our stress. And actually, forest medicine and forest therapy is recognized in other parts of the world as part of preventative medicine. And there are multiple studies suggesting the positive impacts on blood pressure, on our feelings, our mood it can be improved by this experience. But let's talk about it a little bit more, because perhaps this sounds a little strange. Now, forest therapy, as it's mostly termed, so this practice emerged and was kind of born, so to speak, in Japan. And it was a result of a lot of people in Japan in the 1980s becoming quite sick. And this was a change in what was going on with people particularly in Tokyo. But what they noticed was it was a correlation between the tech boom in Japan at the time, where the internet was starting, computer science was becoming a thing, and more people were indoors and overworked and burned out. And so they got sicker and sicker, and there was an uptick in like cancer and autoimmune disorders and mental health issues and suicide. And so the National Health Ministry in Japan was like, we need to do something about this. We need to figure out what can we do to help people? What can we do to stop this trajectory of unhealthy people? Well, one of their experiments was to take busloads of people from Tokyo out into a forest ecosystem in Japan. And they just had them walk through the woods. And when they were doing this, they noticed that this group of people benefited. They had an improved mood and sense of well-being, but also their health and immune systems seemed to be responding well to this. So they thought, okay, great. So this makes sense. Getting people outside is a good thing. Going out of your normal habits and routines is a good thing. But what else is going on here? And so the researchers started to look at the biochemistry, because they're like, well, why is the immune system being influenced? How is that possible? What they discovered during this process is that trees emit antimicrobial, allochemical, volatile organic compounds. So these are organic chemical compounds into the air. So trees are releasing these things called phytoncides. And phytoncides in a tree's life, think of it this way, it's like a chemical life insurance policy. So the trees have these, they help prevent disease, they help prevent pests, like think maybe, termites or something like that. They even help ward off a little bit of fungi, that sort of thing, because they're antimicrobial. But when human immune systems, and probably that of other animals, though research I don't believe has been done on this before, but when human immune systems are exposed to phytoncides, they are impacted. In fact, what happens is our natural killer cells, which are part of our white blood cell system, start to build themselves into little armies, and they actively go after quick-growing cells, including that of cancer cells. So I don't know about you all, but if going out into a forest and being exposed to tree chemicals is going to help my body prevent future cancer, sign me right up, because this is easy, right, for a lot of people, and it's something that we can benefit from without medicine. So this is preventative medicine in other parts of the world. In some areas, health insurance pays for this, okay? And it's probably not that far along our horizon here when this happens here, because in other areas of the world, like for example the United Kingdom, physicians are also prescribing nature in various forms. And this project here is with the Wildfowl Wetlands Trust in the United Kingdom, and they have an active blue prescribing program, which is writing a prescription to get people out into wetlands as part of a preventative wellness. And it's sort of like a drug-free wellness plan that's gaining traction. And this is really strong and positive. And I was talking to the chairman of the board of the WWT, and he was telling me that the local governments were working in tandem with WWT in order to help get people out, because it makes sense. If this is something to support well-being, it's sort of like going to the gym or doing something else, but this has added benefits to support our wellness, then why not, right? And why not try to do that? And in parts of the U.S., this is starting to get a little bit of traction. So there is a program here in the U.S. called Parks RX, the nature prescription, all right? And I have to say that in Ohio, a lot of work is being done over in Cleveland and Akron, where they're working actively with hospitals to start promoting this idea of writing a prescription, or at least sharing that being out in nature is good for us. Because in Canada, doctors there can write a prescription for a national park pass for free. And here in the US, sometimes the America the Beautiful pass is like $85. I mean, sometimes it's a little less money depending on, I think there are some discounts out there, but it's not cheap to get a pass like this. So if a doctor can write that as a prescription, well, that's a good thing. And the prescription on the right gives you an example of how some of these prescription looks, and this is at the University of Pennsylvania, and you can see they have a QR code over here, and that tells students who are given this prescription where to go on their campus to find good spots to be in nature, where they can go and relax and listen to the birds and perhaps see what's going on. So that is pretty cool. And the fact is that this all works because we are nature. We often forget that we are nature, but this is a quote from Andy Goldsworthy, the British artist, who says that nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we've lost our connection to ourselves. And this idea of ornithotherapy is really a conservation initiative. It's just wrapped in a different package, because the more people that recognize the value that birds have to make an impact on our well-being and that they're good for us, the more people are going to want to take care of the birds around us. So in listening to all this, you might be wondering, could ornithotherapy be the wonder drug of the 21st century? Well, I certainly think so, because for me, this practice of ornithotherapy, accessing birds for well-being, I truly believe helped in concert with other traditional ways of fighting cancer. When I was 32 and a very busy young mom of 2 little boys, I was confronted with a health crisis. It started out sort of in a strange way. My husband was a Navy reservist, and he was activated right after 9/11 to go over to Saudi Arabia for what was supposed to be a 5-month deployment. And I guess it was about a month later, I took my boys sledding and ended up crushing 2 of the vertebrae in my back. So I was in a brace from the neck down. And I thought that was challenging enough, having a deployed husband and this broken back. But within, I think it was 5 weeks after that, I was diagnosed with this aggressive form of breast cancer that hit me by surprise because there was no cancer in my family. I thought I had done all the right things to take care of myself, and it happened. And it was an incredibly challenging year for our family, and my older son started experiencing a lot of anxiety, alarming anxiety. And one of the things that he said to me was that my losing my hair, because I had to explain to him, both of my kids, that I was going to lose my hair as a result of the chemotherapy that I was going to take, and that it was a good thing. It meant that the medicine was helping, it was doing its job. But my son begged me to never go in front of his friends without a wig because none of the other mommies were bald. And, it was hard enough to be losing my hair because none of my friends were bald, and I didn't know how I was going to pull it off. So when it did come out, it came out all at once at one night. I thought it wasn't going to happen, because the way it happened was just kind of suddenly. And I found myself with this big pile of hair in my bathroom, and I didn't know, it felt weird to throw that hair away, and it also felt really weird to save it. But I ended up not being able to deal with it. It was late at night, my family was asleep, and I ended up putting it in a bag and stowing it away out of sight. And the next morning, before my family awoke, I felt the need to process this loss because it was impactful, and I was concerned about how my kids were going to respond, and quite honestly, it was kind of scary. So before my family woke, I grabbed my binoculars and I went to my favorite trail because I was lucky. I had birds in my life already when this happened. But I found them to be wellness companions in a way that I never imagined. And as I was walking along this trail, newly bald, I knew that the birds weren't going to judge me for how I looked or how deformed I felt. And I could be myself. I could be Holly the bird watcher, and I wasn't going to be judged for any of the rest of it. And the birds weren't going to label me. And as I was walking, I was listening to a symphony of birds because it happened to be Mother's Day, the height of spring migration in Pennsylvania and Ohio as well. And as I was walking, I noticed the sound of a cerulean warbler singing. Now this bird, they don't even occur in my area anymore as nesting birds because they're under such precipitous decline. But at that time, 22 years ago, this little guy was singing his heart out, and I found him. I couldn't believe it, but I found him in a tree because you probably know this, how hard warblers can be in spring, and you can hear him singing, but finding that little singer, boy, that can be tough. So I felt super lucky to be looking at this warbler, and as I was watching him, I just realized that in that moment, I was living in the moment with the birds. I wasn't worried about what my doctor had told me about my prognosis. I wasn't worried about how my kids were going to be reacting to me. Instead, I was just living in the moment with the cerulean warbler. And as I watched him, I noticed that he was sitting right in front of a nest. And a female cerulean parachuted out of the nest and flew away. And I was like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I actually found a cerulean nest. This is nuts, right? But in that moment, I also realized, my gosh, This little warbler is just like me. We are no different from each other. After all, he's a survivalist too. He had just winged his way back from South America, thousands of miles, to my neighborhood, where he was also trying to raise a brood of young, just like I was, facing all sorts of feats of survival that are unbelievable to people like us, right? And I felt this kinship. I couldn't believe that this warbler was showing me strength and hope. And in that moment, I realized that birds can be a source of inspiration, that they can bring us to a place of peace. And truly, the hope that they provided me during this journey was immeasurable. And that hair that I lost, I ended up taking it and placing it into a suet cage, because I remember hearing that if you put your hair from your dog's hairbrush out in springtime, maybe birds might take that hair and help line their nest with it, nesting material. So I wanted to do an experiment, because what else are you going to do with a bunch of hair, you know? And again, it seemed weird to keep it, but I thought, well, let me do this experiment. So I put the hair in a suet cage, and I had a shepherd's hook right outside my kitchen window. And at this time, I was going through rigorous chemo. I was in a brace from the neck down, and I thought maybe once a day I'll get to the kitchen window, and maybe I'll get lucky. And one of those days, I got lucky, because I was looking out the window. I don't even remember if I was washing dishes or what I was doing, but I remember seeing this tufted titmouse, who probably a lot of you are familiar with. It's a very common bird around here as well, tugging and pulling at the hair in the suet cage. And they're very curious little birds, and she was hopping all around. And the next thing I knew, carried off a wad of my wasted hair and was repurposing it for new life. And in that moment, I had hope. I wasn't as worried about losing my hair, because I thought, my loss, forget about it. The loss of my hair is now going to be repurposed for new life, and this was everything to me. And for me, this idea of the birds gave me a new perspective on life. They gave me hope, and I truly believe they helped support my well-being during my experience while undergoing all of that craziness that year, but also in the many years after, the recovery process, going through other difficult life circumstances. And because I truly believe the birds helped save my life, I've dedicated my life to helping save them through various conservation projects, working with other people, with young people especially. And I truly believe that if we recognize the value of birds, we're going to want to take care of them more. And that's what this is all about. It's taking notice of the little things and savoring those moments. And there's a practice called mindful birding that's getting a lot more attention these days. And what is that all about? Well, you heard me say that while I was watching the cerulean warbler, I was kind of living in the moment with the birds. And this is what birds bring to us. So we know that mindfulness practice has benefits. And I was first introduced to this concept of mindfulness practice when I was a cancer patient, because this concept of mindfulness originates somewhat from Zen meditation, Zen Buddhism meditation, that sort of thing. But actually, there was a doctor in Massachusetts, at the University of Massachusetts Hospital, called Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who developed a program for people undergoing chronic pain, and particularly cancer patients, and it's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the results of which are supposed to help offset some of the chronic pain, anxiety, all those feelings that we go through when we're going through something significant in our lives. And with pairing mindfulness and birding together, we can create an awareness. And so for me, this was being in the moment while watching birds. And the goal is just to slow down, because for me, I was an avid birder before all this happened to me. I was driven by my life list. I was chasing birds all around my county, my state, going wherever I could to see birds. And I loved that. But when I was introduced to a new way of living with chronic pain, with cancer, with chemotherapy, with not being able to have full range of motion because of my back injury, I had no choice but to slow down. And I found that at first very frustrating. I had this FOMO, fear of missing out. All my friends were off going on pelagic trips and da-da-da, and I was, instead having to watch birds out a window. But here's the thing, it was really helpful for me to be intentional and turning my attention to birds because they were bringing me to that mindfulness place. Again, where I wasn't worried about what had happened in the past or what worries I had, what fears I had. Instead, I was focused on the birds, the right here and the right now. And part of mindfulness practice is just letting the experience be what it will be. So not judging myself because I didn't see a lot. I don't have a big eBird checklist. I didn't get to go on a walk. Instead, I had to stay at home. No, just enjoying what I do have, not focusing on what I don't have. And sometimes for me, this can be hard because, I love to take pictures of birds. So I'm always like, I didn't get the best view or my camera wouldn't focus. I'm beating myself up. Or if I make a misidentification, now that's the worst. Then I'm really judgmental of myself. But if I'm just letting things happen and letting it be what it will be, that is more restorative. And always feeding your curiosity and that childlike wonder is so important. And so as we're moving through this practice is gaining a lot of traction. So this is the Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. Has anybody been there before? It's in Florida. Yeah, Sanibel Island. And this is really exciting because they have this mindfulness and nature trail at an area, not in the main refuge, but there's another area called the Bailey Tract. And a couple of years ago, they put up this mindfulness and nature trail. Actually, somebody here in Ohio was very instrumental, Dr. Joe Blanda, in getting this established down there. And this is just like a little kiosk where if you have a phone, you can scan a QR code and listen to a prompt, or just read the prompts for this is mindful reflection right here. The point I'm making here is that when we have national wildlife refuges adopting this type of philosophy of taking time to stop and just be kind of in the moment and allowing ourselves to benefit from that, that is a good thing. And there are many different ways to benefit from mindful birding, and it could be just engaging the senses. Journaling is a huge one. But also, if you're interested in this, the Mindful Birding Network was established a couple of years ago. A lot of the science that I've been talking about is on our website, and I have cards up here if this is of interest to you. But we are helping promote these ideas, and honestly, it's really getting a lot of attention. I get inquiries from people around the globe. I just got interviewed by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation 2 days ago about this concept, and people in Romania have contacted me, people in the UK. Around the world, this idea of inviting more nature into our practice of self-care and well-being is certainly getting a lot of attraction, and part of that is because staying afloat in life can be hard, right? And life can be a challenge at times, and birds can provide us this buoyancy to keep us above the water, so to speak, and that's a really important thing. And a lot of times in life, our relationships with nature change as we change. And this is a quick anecdote about my dad. He suffered from a form of dementia called primary progressive aphasia, which meant that he wasn't able to communicate with his loved ones, his friends anymore. And this is an isolating experience. But what I noticed was that while he couldn't verbally communicate with us, I found him outside whistling to the birds. This is a video I took of him whistling, and it was as if they were whistling back to him. And he found a connection. And he, you could tell, was just feeling like the world around him wasn't closing in, that actually it was expanding, because his perspective of nature and birds changed. So much so that when it came time for me to find a memory care center for him to live in, I selected the one that had the bird feeders outside of all the rooms and in the main area. And because it makes sense that when we bring nature in, that when people can connect with birds, that they're going to benefit from that. And whereas he couldn't even say the word bird, but just the idea that something was coming in and paying him a visit was really important for him in his response, and helped him feel it was obvious, less isolated. This is Alvaro Jaramillo, which a couple of you might know of Alvaro. He's a well-known tour guide, has written and authored books and papers. I'll let him describe his experience.
So, hi everyone. This is my ornithotherapy story. I'm Alvaro Jaramillo. I'm a full-time professional birder, right? So I have a company that does birding tourism. I write for magazines and books, and everything in my working life is about birds. And about 3 years ago, I had some weird symptoms at home, and I went on a trip, on a tour that I was leading in Bhutan, and had a really, I would call it a violent episode where I couldn't stand up. I got dizzy and so forth, and just was awful, and ended up losing all of my hearing from this probably viral infection that I didn't know about, and we never could figure it out. But lost all of my hearing in my left ear, and it was replaced with the ringing tinnitus, or tinnitus as some people call it, that kind of drives you crazy. Well, if you know about birding, you know that hearing fully and being able to locate sounds is one of the ways that you find birds. And suddenly, I couldn't do it. And I didn't know if I could continue actually doing all of the things I do for my work. And it turned out that I could, and I have, and I've shifted how I do things. I've incorporated other people. There's been a lot of positives that come out of this awful situation. But the point here is that the reason I was able to get through it was the birds themselves. It's hard to explain, but when you don't have two ears, it's as if you hear in one dimension, two-dimensional. You cannot actually, your brain cannot differentiate what's important and what isn't important. Everything kind of sounds the same. And I would go to big places like, supermarket, and the sounds were shocking. I would get stressed. I would not, I felt really vulnerable when I was in anything public because of the way my brain couldn't process the sound in a way that made sense of it. But the only place where I felt normal and completely at ease and entirely like the guy I used to be was when I was watching birds. So I'd be outside, and all of the natural sounds would function. I could hear it, I could understand. Maybe I couldn't spot exactly where that Savannah sparrow was singing, but it was where I could feel calm and really think about exactly the point is that the world is still happening. There's all this beauty that's going on, that I am still part of this amazing natural world. And that has been the single most important, not the only, the most important part in my healing from this crazy situation. Maybe by next year, I'll have a cochlear implant or something else that's going to help me out, and that's going to be cool. But if it wasn't for the birds, I don't think I would be doing this well with this crazy situation. So ironically, the birds help me to be a better birder and stay doing what I've always loved to do, which is watch birds and show people birds and enjoy birds with a community of bird people. So thank you, birds.
And I have to report that he did get his cochlear implant. He's doing great, and he's still guiding bird trips around the world. But sometimes birds can help us get through really difficult times of grief and sadness. And so this next segment is from a woman named Liz Pettit, and she's going to share her experience of healing of the heart.
Birding has been a passion of mine for over a decade now, as is photography. It wasn't until a recent tragedy in my life that I found myself in I guess you could say, a different relationship with birds. 3 years ago, my 23-year-old son died very unexpectedly. Grieving his loss was a very dark path for some time, and as I slowly found the light again, I discovered something unexpected. Birds were revealing themselves to me in a way that ultimately played a part in healing of my heart. I now see birds, and aside from the mindfulness and beauty and joy that they bring, they also sometimes bring an amazing gift in the form of a reminder, or you could say a sign, from my son. Just a couple weekends ago, early on a Sunday morning, I headed out to a nearby lake where I bird on occasion, and I came upon 1,000 or so Canada geese. And shortly thereafter, I spotted what looked like 2 white geese and immediately pulled my binoculars to my eyes. It was a pair of almost angelic-looking Canada geese, both of very diffused white and light gray plumage. And as I took these stunning beauties in, I knew right away these were a gift or a sign. See, the anniversary of my son's death, which has been heavy on my heart and mind this month, was coming up in another week. So yet again, one of many signs I've experienced where birds gave me the gift of peace and comfort, the spirit of my son, and the continued healing of my heart.
And watching even the most common birds can teach us something and be therapeutic, which is how this work with the book Ornitherapy came about, Ornitherapy for Your Mind, Body, and Soul, which I co-authored with Richard Crossley and Sophie Crossley, Richard's daughter. And throughout the book, we take those ideas, this science, and how do you harness it and put it into practice. And so the book involves a lot of guided ways in which to take that research and put it into action for our benefit. And that led to another book I co-authored with a German ornithologist called The Power of Bird Watching, or if you speak German, read German, you might be able to read the German title. And again, this same concept of accessing birds for our well-being and understanding them more so that we can understand ourselves better, right? Because the fact is that the more we look at and observe birds, the more we understand them, but also ourselves, and the happier and healthier we'll be. Because watching birds brings us so much joy, but there's so much more in it for us, for our mind, body, and spirit. And so my question to all of you is, have birds impacted your life? Well, if they have, spread the word. And I want to invite you all to share, if you're willing, any ways in which you've found birds in your life helping support you or finding joy at difficult times or being the bright light you needed to get through. Or perhaps it's even a bird song that instills joy in your heart when you hear it. So at this time, I'm open to any of those comments, but also any questions you might have. Any questions? How about a bird song that makes somebody feel good? Anybody willing to share which bird song brings them joy? Yeah. Morning dove, nice. Oh, yeah. They do have a wonderful sound. Very gentle. Anyone else? Yeah.
Got a hold of me and played a recording of a song. Her father was dying and wanted to know what species of bird it was. And so I told them, and they were very, very grateful.
Oh.
I had another lady that was a member of the Nature Center and was kind of a casual birder, and then she was struck with cancer and battled it for several years, and I remember seeing her in our bird watching room one day and going in to chat with her, and she said, birding saved my life.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful, right? It really supports. I think probably everybody can relate to how good birds make you feel, how much they can add to your life. And when we think about it, and we think about the space that they hold for us, and this calming and just a connection, it really is something that is, I feel can be powerful. That's kind of an overuse of that word in the sense, but it's true. I don't know any other, the magnitude of which it can be, birding can be therapeutic and healing, but even just that it's joyful. And it gets us outside. It gets our bodies moving, our minds thinking. It's great for cognitive, forget about the brain games we can download on our phones. It's like, who thinks bird ID is easy? Yeah, it's pretty challenging. It gets you to think, and you're thinking about what you're hearing, what you're looking at, and putting things together. Really, there's so many benefits to birding.
Well, thank you very much, Holly.
Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. And I hope I see some of you tomorrow for the bird outing that we're going to do. And I apologize to anybody who came out today and was looking to go birding in the rain. And we decided to postpone it because of the wind mostly. I was saying to John that, like, with the wind sometimes the birds kind of hunker down because birds don't mind rain, and like insects come lower, which sometimes birding and light rain can be the best because they're much lower down to the ground and you get better looks at them. But when that wind gets involved, it makes things a little challenging. The birds don't want to spend energy trying to stabilize. And I was out there earlier in the morning, and there were some Cape May warblers and bay-breasted warblers out there singing away. But as soon as, like, I could feel the pressure drop and it started to get darker, all of a sudden everybody went quiet. And I was like, oh, this is a sign. So that just means tomorrow is going to be that much better. So hopefully some of you will be able to make it out tomorrow morning. And I think we're starting at 10:30 at the train depot, right? Yeah, so thank you very much. Yeah, so appreciate it.